Hello everybody, my name is Aaron Bolio, and this is, well, kind of a new setup right now for Roshango's reviews. I've been going through a lot of changes here in the last year and a half or so. Anybody that's been following the show on YouTube, I know there's only about 7 subscribers right now, but we did an entire 2016, pretty much the entire summer movie season last year. Unfortunately, I never really got an opportunity to upload any of those to YouTube. They're still just at the Leominster Public Access TV station. If I get an opportunity, I might get a hand of those from Carl if anybody wants to see my reviews of some of the movies that came out last year. I didn't get a chance to see too many. I think the show is going to be going through some reworks because I do really enjoy doing these movie reviews. It's just been such a pain with school. I take a lot of classes in the fall and the spring, making it very, very difficult for me to see movies consistently enough to do the show. But there's a couple other problems too. This being the main one is that basically I would always record the show on a Thursday afternoon. That was when I had the studio available, and that's when I could wear my nice suit and go in front of the nice camera with the nice green screen and my little theater background and play various trailer clips and whatnot. Unfortunately, some problems have arisen from that. A couple of the main ones are sometimes I would see a movie that was so bland and so stupid and so forgettable that I couldn't really talk about it for 15 minutes because I had to fill about a half-hour time slot. And so I would have to, you could notice too, and it's blatantly clear, I don't want to pretend to hide it. In some of my older reviews, I would start repeating myself, really dragging it on, have longer pauses, really just to pad the time so I could fill that time spot, because some movies you really just can't talk about with this. So with the YouTube format, I plan on doing pretty much all the reviews on YouTube now, one movie at a time, instead of cramming 2 into 30 minutes. That way each review can be as long or short as it needs to, because some of the more interesting movies I could talk about for 20 minutes or even the whole half-hour show if it was really interesting, while other ones I could really only talk about for 5 to 10 minutes maximum. This gives me a little bit more liberty in the matter. Also, it gives me a bit more control over it. I know this one's just going to be a picture of the Wonder Woman poster with my voice over it right now, but that is pretty much just because of the limitations I have. I really don't have any equipment here at home other than basic editing software that I'm not connected to right now, and my friend is finishing up a new computer for me so I can have a better editing software. So for now it's just going to be microphone and a poster picture until I can get some better equipment and better software to make a better edited review. Of course, I want to be careful about it too, because I don't want to trigger the YouTube copyright system, because she's a fickle mistress. The other problem with the Thursday, though, is I think Avengers Age of Ultron was a good example of this, where a massive release would come out, and I would do a review Thursday, and then go see the massive release, because it's always like over the weekend, so a Friday, a Thursday or Friday into the Saturday, Sunday weekend, and then almost a week would pass before I'd have an opportunity to talk about it, and then a few more days would pass before it would even air on Leominster Access Television. So you'd be looking at about 10 days between when the movie came out and my review, and when it's a big enough release, like Star Wars, for example, everybody's going to have seen it by that point, or most people who were already interested would have seen it by that point. So with this, I can pretty much just watch a movie, come home, and quickly spew my thoughts out into the computer and post on YouTube within the hour of seeing it. For example, the movie we're doing today, Wonder Woman, came out last night, and so I can talk about it immediately. Unfortunately, there might be some background noise, and it might be more convenient. So for now, bear the low quality of a poster and a microphone until I can get my my act together. I really do want to try and improve this YouTube channel. I think it's one of my goals for this year. It was one of my goals for last year, but I slipped on it big time. So this is my this is my redemption, I guess you could say. So without further ado, and I know I've already wasted enough time, Wonder Woman 2017. May I first begin, when talking about Wonder Woman 2017, to say, can anybody believe it took this long for a Wonder Woman movie to come out? It's almost shocking to me that it took as long as it has for Wonder Woman, who is one of DC's big three heroes and one of the longest lasting comic book heroes and feminist icons, to get her own movie. It's actually unbelievable when you consider the fact that Green Lantern got a movie before her. And I love Green Lantern, and he's definitely a major part of the DC of the DC universe, but you'd think Flash or Wonder Woman would have came out before him. I don't know. Steel, in the 90s we had Steel and Spawn get their own movies. Guardians of the Galaxy, as good as those two movies are, I didn't get a chance to review Guardians 2 yet, but those are two great movies. Guardians of the Galaxy, I've never heard of them before the movies came out. And even they got two movies before Wonder Woman, one of the most recognizable superheroines in history, got a movie. So I guess first thought is about time. But before I could really delve too much into Wonder Woman, let's recap the DC cinematic universe as it is now. And I think a lot of people who watch the show already know I'm a DC fan. I've loved Marvel's movies. They've been making great movies, but I've always been more of a DC fan. The Justice League and particularly Batman and Superman are more familiar to me than pretty much any other Marvel superhero. And so I've had some pretty mixed feelings about their cinematic universe so far. Man of Steel I haven't seen since it came out. At the time, I remember really liking it, but its flaws have become more and more apparent to me as time has gone on, and I'll get into some of those flaws later. Anyone who saw my Batman vs. Superman review knew that it was a movie that I was looking very, very forward to because it featured my two favorite heroes and two of the most iconic heroes in comic books. And I hated the movie completely. Well, not completely. There were moments in the movie, and this is what I believe I said in my review at the time. There were parts of the movie that I really felt were spectacular. The actual fight between Batman and Superman was really great. The warehouse scene and everything featuring Wonder Woman. I thought the casting of Ben Affleck as Batman was really, really good. The overall problem was I felt like they couldn't really connect these things. The tone was really dour and dark. You could barely see a thing half the time. It fell into the comic book... It fell into, I shouldn't say comic book, but really just action movie trope of put the actor in front of a green screen and let's make flashy lights distract you from what's actually happening. And I will get into a little bit of that with Wonder Woman. But the whole movie just felt dour and sad and bleak. It was boring at a lot of times. Most of the movie felt pointless. I really could not attach myself to Superman at all, which is a shame because I mentioned this when I reviewed The Man from U.N.C.L.E., but Henry Cavill, who plays Superman in the DC cinematic universe, Henry Cavill, I felt like in The Man from U.N.C.L.E. showed that he really could play Superman. He had the exact charm and charisma required to play Superman, but I just felt like the biggest flaw in Batman vs. Superman was a direction. And I could see the potential of the film, but it reached nowhere near those heights. And I guess then Suicide Squad came out, and I'll begin, I guess, one of my biggest retractions at the time. I know neither of these reviews are on YouTube. I would like to get them on there at some point. But Suicide Squad, at the time, I said DC was moving kind of in the right direction, and I think it was an improvement, but it was still very, very flawed. I actually, about 2 months ago or something like that, I came home. My dad had rented Suicide Squad because he wanted to see it, and I thought, okay, I'll give it a rewatch. After a second viewing, I can definitively say that I hate Suicide Squad more than Batman vs. Superman. Holy crap. I forgot how unbelievably terrible a lot of the parts were, and I overestimated how good some of these parts were. It was it was an absolute joke. It just felt like it was one of those movies where you could tell that there was a big corporate influence over it, that a lot of direction was changed, and as you found out, yeah, it was. There was a ton of reworks, a ton of re-edits from trailer companies, and the whole movie was an absolute mess. And so, if I were to kind of put my situation of the DC Cinematic Universe as a whole, and I hate saying this because, as I said before, I am a DC fan, and this whole universe has felt like nothing more than a reactionary move to everything that Marvel and Disney has done. And I don't blame them necessarily, because they found a great deal of success with their cinematic universe, particularly all the movies building up to the Avengers. It was something that had never been done before, and DC is scrambling to get Justice League out as fast as possible, and I still have my concerns for Justice League. So going into Wonder Woman, I already had a humongous deal of concern regarding it. I was absolutely terrified to think about what this was going to be, and the trailers made it look really good, and I can proudly say after seeing it that I'm alright, DC, I'm going to give you a second chance. I want to give Wonder Woman 2 thumbs up. It might be on my top 5 favorite superhero movies of all time. I'll take that with a grain of salt, because I only saw the movie just last night. Maybe I have rose-colored glasses on. Maybe it's just because I'm still letting it process. And I might reanalyze this sometime later. But as of right now, I could proudly say I'm looking forward to it coming out on Blu-ray. I'll probably get it for Blu-ray. I really, really enjoyed this movie. I'm going to get into all the reasons why right now. So, Wonder Woman this movie is a flashback of something you see in Batman vs. Superman. In that movie, in Batman vs. Superman, Bruce Wayne discovers who Diana Prince is as Wonder Woman because of a picture that he found of her back from World War I with a few army buddies. He sends it to her, tells her, how old are you actually? And that's when she realizes that Bruce Wayne has figured out who she is. This movie begins with her receiving the picture from that film, and then it flashes back to give the film the picture context as we learn of Wonder Woman's origin story. And this is a very well done origin story for many reasons. First off, I love the setting. I don't want to say I'm a huge World War I fan, but the setting of World War I think, is a very great setting that's often underutilized, even more so than World War II, because of the trench warfare, the images of that bleak hopelessness, and I'll get into that a little bit later with one of my big compliments of the movie. But I feel like World War I is such an underutilized setting. It really is spectacular to see, and it really does invoke a lot of intense, heavy emotions, more than I think most other war settings can, because of no man's land, because of the trenches, the machine guns, the disease, the injury. It was a very bleak and horrifying war, and to see it on the big screen really captures the eye, I think, more than a scene from D-Day, or it's up there with like some great Holocaust movies when you talk about war and the tragedy of it all. And I think that's what makes it such a great setting. And so I was looking very, very forward to seeing Wonder Woman fighting in World War I. I just thought the premise alone sounded pretty cool. My one concern going into the movie was that it was going to come across as a major ripoff of Captain America, because Captain America was I think it was a decent movie, the very first Captain America that they made, the first Avenger. The World War II setting was probably my favorite thing about the movie. The rest of it was pretty typical. I'm this isn't a big Captain America review, but I can proudly say that Wonder Woman does not rip off Captain America at all in this film. I found that other than the fact that it's a superhero in older setting, that's about all the two having. Oh, and both of them use a shield, but they use it very differently. So, both of them are very, very, very different settings. But this was a pretty good way to start it off. Now, story synopsis. Diana is the daughter of Hippolyta. Now, Hippolyta is the queen of the island of Themyscira, for anyone who doesn't know their DC comic book history. Themyscira is the island of the Amazons. A great war once happened involving the Greek gods, and the Amazons were created to quell man's rage and ensure peace across the world. After this major war of the gods, Ares, the god of war, killed most of the gods, but was struck down by his father Zeus in a final effort. Zeus then bore life to Diana, who is Wonder Woman, after Hippolyta asked him for a daughter that she made out of clay. I know, it's one of the weirder ones. There have been various versions of the Wonder Woman backstory. They went with the statue of clay that came to life. What can I say? But it's supposed to come across as a one of those classic Greek stories, one of those classic Greek god stories. And so the island of Themyscira, of all women who are immortal, is blocked off by a mystic veil, so the outside world of man cannot find it simply by a map, and is basically invisible until you reach the barrier. It's here where the Amazons train and live their lives, preparing for what they hope will never come, is the return of Ares, the god of war. And so we open to Themyscira with a young Diana, who you can tell is very excited because she wishes to not be a princess, but be a warrior, an Amazon warrior, like her aunt and like many of the Amazon warriors of the island. It is kind of a Disney princess story, I guess, in that aspect and that aspect alone, but we don't branch on that very well. It is until her mother Hippolyta decides that Diana should in fact be trained to be a warrior, and Diana, with her superhuman abilities, because she was brought to life by a god, they reveal a little bit more of her backstory later on. I don't want to spoil that aspect of the story, but Diana believes that she might be the one that has to bring down Ares should the time come, and so they begin her rigorous Amazon training. She becomes one of the brightest students on the island, one of its fiercest warriors, but she severely injures her aunt in a training exercise, and it begins her worry. She runs across the island and sees a plane beginning to crash land. On this plane, she saves the life of the pilot, Steve Trevor, an American pilot and spy who had been spying on the Germans in the Ottoman Empire until he discovered that they were creating a very, very dangerous gas. After a run-in with some of the Germans that were tracking down Steve Trevor, Steve reveals to the Amazons that a gas is being created by the Germans, who are currently on the brink of losing the war at the time, that could bring them back into the war and kill millions of lives, as gas masks are basically vaporized by this thing. Steve has stolen the notes of its main doctor, Dr. Poison as she is nicknamed as a DC villain, and he needs to bring them back to British High Command so that they can act upon it quickly, and disable this gas before it jeopardizes the war, and it gives an opportunity for the armistice, which is the real-life armistice that ended World War I. Basically, the plot line of this is this gas could jeopardize the signing of the armistice. And so Diana wishes to bring Steve back to this island because she believes that Ares, the god of war, who corrupts the minds of men to make them fight such brutal battles, is the one in charge, maybe not in charge of the Germans, but the ones corrupting the Germans. Steve finds this to be a very naive look, and he's very skeptical of it, but if he believes that Diana can help them and believes that Diana can bring him home to deliver these notes, he's willing to work with her. And so begins their adventure. So, positives of the movie immediately, as I said, the setting before is great, but not just World War I, but also Themyscira. which is nicknamed in the DC universe as Paradise Island. It's supposed to be this beautiful, ancient-looking island, and I love the direction they went with it. They have a lot of vines growing on it, but ultimately it looks like a Greek island, and it looks absolutely gorgeous. Now, a lot of it is because of CGI. What can you expect? But they do a lot of on-location shooting as well. And you get to see some good-looking architecture and some beautiful-looking artwork across the island. And it's not exactly what I pictured Themyscira to look like, but seeing that interpretation, I sat there and went, yeah, no, this works. This really works for Themyscira, and it felt really good to see that that place come to life. And it's in such stark contrast to London, in the 1910s, looking very smoky, very brown, very dour. You can see a lot of the greed and corruption of man in there, and of course the front lines of the war. And all of these settings look very distinct, but very nice. It was really nice to see some of these settings, because I feel like we just don't see them very often, as I said. The biggest strength of the movie by far, though, is not as much the setting or the action or anything else, but the chemistry between Diana and Steve. For most of the first half of the movie, Diana doesn't even wear the Wonder Woman costume, and you do see her fight and train a little bit, but there isn't a great deal of superhero-esque action until about the halfway mark. It's mostly just Steve and Diana going around London, Diana kind of learning, and of course it's a bit of a fish out of water story, because Diana is not from our world, she's from her world on Themyscira. But the chemistry between the two, watching the two of them learn from each other, work off each other, not even just flirt, but just talk to each other, kind of relate to one another, it's wonderful. Not to use the pun because she's Wonder Woman, but I didn't mind that there wasn't a lot of action in the first half. I didn't mind that it was mostly just them going around and talking, even if it was in front of a green screen or in front of actual settings, or talking to unrelated people, or going to Parliament buildings, or whatever it is they were doing. I didn't mind. I really loved watching the two of them. It's very hard to do, especially in a superhero movie where you're so eager to see the superhero. It was one of the major complaints of The Dark Knight Rises, now I think of it, was the lack of Batman in that movie. But in this movie, you don't even mind the lack of Wonder Woman, because when she does come out, it's spectacular. But until then, you really, really feel a connection to Diana and Steve. They both are very, very different, but they work off each other very, very well. And I could watch them just shoot this shit in a bar for an hour, and I'd probably be satisfied. The casting was very phenomenal. I think I already said that about Wonder Woman back in my Batman vs. Superman review, but she continued to shine here, and there was a lot of life, and that's what I think was the biggest contrast between this and Batman vs. Superman, was these characters. I don't want to compare them to Marvel, because this is one of the things too, the whole overall tone of the movie is very, very different from a Marvel movie, but it was also very, very different from the three other DC movies that we've gotten so far in the cinematic universe. It was very distinct from any other superhero movie I've ever watched. It felt a bit like a war movie. It felt a bit, at times, felt like a Steven Spielberg movie. And other times, it kind of reminded me of Harry Potter. Sometimes it reminded me of Lord of the Rings. It all kind of depended on the setting, but the tone was a lot, I don't want to say lighter, but it felt more human than Batman vs. Superman, where Superman just felt so detached from everything, and Batman, for the usual brooding, also felt a bit detached. Diana, at every point of the movie, you enjoyed her. She made you smile. You were glad to spend the movie with her, and she was a great lead to have. And I'm looking forward to seeing her in more movies. And that is detached from the setting entirely, which, as much as I love the setting, Diana was the star of the show, and she really, really did it. And Steve, every step of the way you were rooting for him. Every step of the way you were enjoying his antics. Of course, he was a bit of a wise ass, and he had his mission in mind, but his character felt a lot different than even some of the wise asses you've seen in, like Tony Stark or Stephen Strange and some of the Marvel movies. It was very, very distinct, and I loved watching the two of them. And then, of course, we have the action scenes, as you would always want in a superhero movie. And the action scenes in this one, I really, really enjoyed. They mixed a lot of very well choreographed hand-to-hand fight scenes with the occasional CGI, over-the-top superhero jump or spin. Or there were a lot of moves that looked like this, where she would jump and horizontally spin in the air, and you would shoot an arrow or swing a sword or block something with her invincible gauntlets. And this was a great action experience for me because, and this is something a lot of people talk about when they talk about CGI, it used a lot of CGI, obviously, and it used a lot of those choreographed, down-to-earth action, and it blended the two of them almost seamlessly. And so when somebody did something that was a bit over the top or a bit ridiculous, like some of the Amazon women during the training scenes would be almost spinning off of their swords to shoot arrows and be insanely accurate and things like that, you almost didn't mind those because they just looked cool when you also had these. And I think that's a big thing with action nowadays, is you need to kind of blend the practical and the computer, and this movie did a really good job of that for the most part, blending those two action elements in. It was an absolute blast to watch Wonder Woman once she was actually in the costume, jumping around, deflecting bullets with her gauntlets, using the lasso of truth to lasso people and drag them towards her, blocking people with the shield, hitting people with the shield, jumping around. It was a really fun action experience from a hero you didn't really expect it from, because Wonder Woman's powers have always been a bit inconsistent in the comics and even television and movies, and it's really cool to see her doing her thing, and in such a well choreographed way. And it wasn't just her. It was really fun to watch some of the other action scenes too regarding the war. You got to remember, this is World War I, so you get to see quite a bit of World War I technology. Biplanes flying around on occasion. Some of the older machine guns and rifles, as her compatriots, who Steve knows to help them on their mission, join along for the action. You get to see some fun gunplay, you get to see some fun sword play, you get to see some fun shield play, you get to see some fun superpowers. It's a bit of everything, a bit of a mixed bag, but that's what I would want from not only a World War I movie, but a superhero movie as well. And I feel like this movie really did a A+ job with the action. Well, maybe an A-. I don't want to spoil too much of the movie, but what I will say is the final fight I did have a bit of mixed feelings on, because, and this is something I said in my Batman vs. Superman review, I wasn't the biggest fan of the Doomsday fight. There were some aspects of it I liked, but I really, really hated the look of it. It was this really dark, black of night look with some really disgusting looking CG fire, and it had this weird glow, and sometimes it was kind of hard to see what was going on, and it looked really fake and unrealistic. And I feel like they could have done that part a little bit better. Everything else seamlessly combined, the CG and the live action, but in this one, in that scene, you could clearly tell that they were in front of a green screen, and the fire was fake, and the atmosphere was fake, and the lighting looked kind of off. The whole thing looked kind of odd, and even though some of the action scenes in it were alright, it really was not as strong as I think some of the other action scenes were, so the ending might not have had the strongest note. Emotionally, though, there were some really good notes. As I mentioned, the emotional connection between Steve and Diana. There's some really heartbreaking scenes in there. The atmosphere of the war, of course, really added to it. Another flaw I would say is I really liked the people who helped them along the way. There are three gentlemen, a Native American, an Irishman, and a Indian, who are mercenaries that end up helping Steve and Diana in their fight towards the end of the movie. They're really fun guys, but they don't really get a lot to do, and I thought it would have been nice to see them do a little bit more in the movie. But you did feel something for them a bit of the ways away. But I wanted to save this point for last. We're going very well over time, as you can see. This is definitely why I wanted to put these online, because yeah, we're already over the half-hour mark here. But this, to me, this aspect of the film is what really made me love it, and what really made me dislike Batman vs. Superman and some of the other major superhero movies nowadays. But this is what it is, and this is what I think superhero movies should do, and I'm surprised how little of them actually do this. Let me give some context to this as a DC fan. The big two of DC, obviously, are Batman and Superman. And they each have kind of a different sort of view surrounding them. Batman is seen as someone whose goal is to inspire fear in the minds of criminals and villains, while Superman inspires hope in the minds of heroes and the innocent. And while Batman can inspire hope and Superman can inspire a bit of fear, that's what the main focus is. And I think that's what some of the Batman movies have done so well, is inspire the fear in the criminals. You can see it in their eyes. Particularly I think in the Nolan movies did a really good job of making henchmen terrified when Batman was in the room. You could see them get nervous. You can see the superstition start to grow surrounding the Batman, and it's something that worked really well. And if you looked at the original Superman movies back in the 70s, even the cheesy, stupid ones, Superman was seen as this bright symbol of hope. He was everything that was good and just in the world, and you could see all of the people of the world swoon over him, and they felt safer with him, and they knew the world was a better place with him. And in Man of Steel, which is a movie I have mixed feelings about, but I still kind of like, and Batman vs. Superman I don't like, Batman's aspect of fear, I think, comes across, but Superman's aspect of hope is absolutely lost on me. I don't feel hope or inspired with that Superman and his dark suit and his lifeless appeal and his completely charismaless demeanor. I don't feel the hope. I don't feel it. I don't see people on the screen getting inspired by him or delighting over him. There's a couple scenes where they try to make it seem like that. Like, for example, when he saves the family from the hurricane in Batman vs. Superman, there's like glimpses of it. But for the most part, people are afraid of Superman. They're terrified of him. They don't like him. They don't know what to think, which I think is an interesting aspect. But you need to show the hope there too. Even Lois Lane just kind of saw him more as a love interest than anything greater. And I think that's the biggest flaw, is Superman is supposed to be what, stand for truth, justice, the American ways, stand for what we all want, stand what we all stand for, but ultimately inspire hope and inspire regular people to do great things. That is something I do not get in the new Superman movies. Wonder Woman, on the other hand, there's a scene in this movie, and it is the first time that you see Diana with the Wonder Woman costume and kicking ass. And in this scene, we are walking through the trenches of World War I. This is, I guess you could call this a bit of a spoiler, but I think it gets a greater point across. You see Wonder Woman walking, and Steve in the group walking through the trenches of World War One. Diana's just wearing a black robe over her costume, not to bring attention to herself. The soldiers have incredibly low morale, and how could they not? They've been living in a disgusting, disease-filled trench for over a year. Steve points out that they've been trying to advance on the Germans, but haven't been able to gain an inch. He points out that right there is no man's land, and you cannot, no man can cross it, because on the other side there are men with machine guns ready to shoot anybody that leaves the trench. Same on this side. Throughout the trench there are villagers who are depressed because they have no food, they're starving, and their village on the other side of the no man's land has been taken over by the Germans, and their people have been enslaved. It is a truly tragic, dark, and horrific situation. And Diana decides she wants to do something about it, despite Steve saying that they need to get to where they need to go. Diana then takes the robe off, and in this horrific scene full of browns and grays and blacks and dirty looking colors and dead trees and just grim imagery, a beautiful, strong woman comes out of the trench wearing bright blue, red, and gold, shining there like a symbol. The Germans begin firing on her, and she begins deflecting the bullets with her gauntlets and ultimately taking out her shield. As she starts moving through no man's land, you can see all of the soldiers widening their eyes. Steve Trevor grabs his rifle and tells his compatriots, "She's giving us cover, let's go." And so Steve and the mercenaries charge into the trench and start firing on the Germans, with Diana giving them support. Next thing you know, the soldiers who have been fighting in these trenches can see it. They feel optimistic, and they go in the trench. They go into no man's land too. After a year of not being able to gain any ground, after a year of being demoralized and watching poor villagers cry over their village, this symbol of hope comes out from the trenches and motivates an army and raises morale, and they fight and they win the day in one of the best action scenes I've ever seen in a superhero movie. And ultimately, I'm usually very critical when it comes to action scenes. I had a big childish grin on my face while I watched Wonder Woman bring justice to the German soldiers. And I felt like if I was one of the soldiers in that trench, I would have followed her into the gates of hell if I had to, because that was the optimism and the hope that came from that. And you could see it in the faces of the soldiers, you could see it in the faces of Steve Trevor and Wonder Woman's allies, and you could see it in the faces of the innocent villagers who won their village back and thanked her and lorded over her as a hero. And that's what I think DC Comics has done so well in comics, is to create heroes that are larger than life that we wish to inspire to be. And that element of hope and inspiration is what I think a superhero movie should be able to do. And it's one that a Superman movie in particular should be able to do and hasn't been. But Wonder Woman, on the other hand, they managed to get across that feeling almost perfectly. And it was a testament to the direction, to the casting, to the acting, to the score, which was of course very badass. The choreography and just every element of it came together in that scene in particularly, and it might go down as one of my favorite individual scenes in a superhero movie, because it was that amazing to watch, and I had so much fun watching that particular scene And so that is what ultimately made Wonder Woman a success for me, was the fact that its lead was not only a delight to watch, fun to watch, great to be with throughout the movie, but also felt like a superhero, felt like a genuinely good person, felt like the guardian of peace, justice, and righteousness that Wonder Woman is supposed to be. And that's why I find this movie successful, is because it not only was a great Wonder Woman movie, but it was a great superhero movie. It really brought me back to why I love superheroes. And in a genre that I think is getting very stale, I love Marvel. I love the Marvel movies, don't get me wrong. But there is a bit of a formula with them, and I'm beginning to follow it, and it's starting to wear thin on me. And I'm hoping that Marvel can kind of maybe change the formula up too, as it continues to try and be safe. And the DC movies, which are too black, too bland, too lifeless, this movie had a very distinct tone and feeling to it that I feel like more superhero movies maybe shouldn't try to replicate, but should at least inspire to convey. And with that, I think I'm going to give the movie an 8.5 out of 10. I was really considering giving it an 8 last night, and then I kind of thought about giving it a 9 this morning. I think I actually edited another review where I gave it the 9, but I think 8.5 makes sense. I still would put it in like my top 5 favorite superhero movies as of right now, anyway. I think this is a fair rating. I believe that the movie definitely wasn't perfect, and it did have its problems, and I think a lot of those problems came in the third act, but it's hard for me to really talk about that without spoiling it, because I do think this is definitely still a movie you should see. And, you know, I do kind of wish that the other leads had some time in the spotlight too, because I did enjoy them where I could, and there were a few throwaway characters that probably weren't entirely necessary. But other than that, I do think 8.5 to 9, about where I would put it. So I'll stick with the 8.5 to be fair. Definitely go see Wonder Woman. I couldn't recommend it enough. It's a great superhero movie, a great war movie, and I guess for the first time in about a month I can finally say this. Thank you for watching, or at least listening, and have a good weekend at the movies. That's it for me. Bye.